Hello! Today I'm going to be sharing one of my favorite recipes for chocolate babka, which is a traditional Jewish dessert that uses brioche and then has a chocolate or cinnamon filling. Now we're going to start with a half cup of milk, and you want to heat that until it's about at 110 degrees. If it's any hotter, it will kill the yeast. And then we're going to put in our yeast packet along with a pinch of sugar, which is what feeds the yeast, allowing it to create the rise in the dough. Now we're going to get started on the brioche dough with 4 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, and then 1½ teaspoon of salt, a 1/3 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of lemon zest, a 1/2 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now I did this in my stand mixer using the bread hook, but if you don't have a stand mixer, you can always just use a large bowl and a wooden spoon to create the dough. And then now we are just going to add in the yeast after giving the dough a quick spin, just to make sure that all of the other ingredients are well incorporated. And you just want to gently drizzle that into the dough. So now we're going to add in our eggs. And I like to whisk them together ahead of time before adding them into the dough. And what the eggs do to the structure, along with the butter that we are going to be adding, is that it actually makes the dough more tender, since fat of any kind will coat the gluten strands and inhibit them from forming those long, strong bonds that they do in a regular bread. So now we're going to start adding in our butter, and you want your butter to be really soft. You want it to be at room temperature so that it will incorporate into the dough. And you want to mix in the butter until the dough becomes soft and malleable. And you'll definitely see that it starts to stick on the side of the bowl, but you can always add a tablespoon or 2 of flour to make sure that it's not sticking too much. Now, once it is to that correct consistency, you want to remove it from the bowl that you are using and butter a new bowl. And this is what we're going to be proofing our babka dough in. And you want to make sure that you butter both the bowl very well and then also roll your dough in the butter very well to make sure that it doesn't stick, so you can remove it easily after it's done proofing. So then we're just going to set the dough aside for 1 to 2 hours until it has roughly doubled in size. Now, in the meantime, let's get started on the chocolate filling. Now you start out with 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, and then we're going to put in 3/4 cup of heavy cream. And we're just going to simmer this over medium heat until the sugar has fully dissolved, but you do not want to let it come to a boil. Now we're going to weigh out 6 ounces of chocolate. You can use whatever chocolate you have around the house. I used these dark chocolate chips. Whatever chocolate you have will work for this. And then we are also going to need 8 tablespoons of butter. Now we're going to take the sugar and heavy cream mixture, and we're just going to add that into the chocolate and wait for it to melt, and then we are also going to stir in the butter as well. And I also like to add into this chocolate filling some cinnamon and nutmeg, just so that it brings out the flavor that we added into the dough, and also because a traditional babka is a cinnamon flavored filling instead of the chocolate, as well as adding in 1 teaspoon, as well as adding in the 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and pinch of salt that the recipe calls for. And when you're done, you just want to put this into a container and pop it into the fridge. And since this recipe has so many different elements going on, I usually make everything one day in advance, since you do need to put the babka in the fridge overnight. So I make the chocolate filling, the streusel, and the sugar syrup the day before. So now that the babka has been proofing for about an hour and a half, you can see that it has definitely grown in size. It doesn't need to fully double, but just as long as you can see that it has had some rise. We're going to punch it down and then recover the bowl and refrigerate that overnight. If you aren't able to refrigerate it overnight, you want to do it for at least 4 hours because it helps develop the flavor and it also lets it have a slower rise in the fridge. Now we're going to make the sugar syrup by combining 2/3 of a cup of sugar and 2/3 of a cup of water. And you just want to simmer this over medium heat until the sugar fully dissolves into the water. Then I am going to make the streusel, starting out with a 1/2 cup of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And then we're going to mix that all together, and then we are going to add in 4.5 tablespoons of melted butter. And you want to mix those together with a fork until it is evenly distributed and forms large, moist crumbs. And then we are also going to mix in 3/4 of a cup of chocolate chips. All right, it is the next day and it is time to start shaping our babka. So I'm gonna grab my brioche out of the fridge, and you wanna let it sit out a little bit before you start working with it, just so that it's soft enough. So you take half of the brioche dough and you are going to roll it out into a roughly 9 by 17 inch triangle. It takes a little while to get the dough softened so that you can roll it out, but you also don't want to overwork it too much. So you've got to work fairly quickly. And as you can see, it's a little bit tough to get it to be a perfect rectangle, so you just do the best that you can. So once you have it shaped into a nice rectangle, we are going to spread half of the chocolate filling all over the top of the dough, right to the edges. You want to make sure that you get as much filling in this as possible. And once it is evenly spread out, you're going to start rolling it up along the longest edge, and you want to make sure that it's very tightly rolled. And then we are going to pop this into the freezer for about 10 minutes while we do the same thing to the other half of the dough. And also we are going to butter and prepare our pan for the babka. And what I do as well is add some parchment paper into the bottom and along the sides so that you can easily remove the babka when it comes out of the oven. So now that the babka is out of the freezer, we're going to cut it in half lengthwise, and we're going to twist these two halves of babka together as if we were braiding them. And then we are also going to fold it in half so that it will fit into our pan. And then we're going to let that proof for another hour. Now with my second coil, I'm going to be making some babka cupcakes, muffins, whatever you want to call them. So I just take my coil and I'm going to cut them into about 4, you could do 5 pieces, and you want to put them into a well-buttered muffin tin. And I basically just try to twist them around themselves and then stick them into the tin. And these only need to proof for about 30 to 45 minutes before you pop them into the oven. So now these have been proofed, and then I'm just going to put some of the streusel on top. And then you want to do the same with the big babka loaf. And then we are going to bake them at 350 degrees, the large babka loaf for about 50 minutes, and for the cupcakes, we are going to bake those for about 30 minutes. Now, once they are out of the oven, you want to poke them with a skewer and make sure to go all the way through to the bottom and then you're going to douse them in sugar syrup to make sure that their moisture is locked in so they stay fresh longer. And it also adds a little bit of sweetness since there isn't actually that much sugar in the dough itself. And there it is. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video so you don't miss one in the future.